Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of this is understanding when we're talking about, the use of this data. So essentially, a lot of times people will say this is what you would call regulatory grade or quality data. Much of this has to do, again, with understanding your research agenda. So oftentimes people focus on a registry as an endpoint versus registries are really, again, a tool. It's a database. It's a platform to collect your data, to manage it, to store it. And really, the key question here is, what is the data driving towards? So, for example, if you're starting out and all your focus at this stage is really just starting to get a sense of what is the patient population itself, you may not need regulatory grade data to start, but you really need well-selected data in terms of helping you connect where your patients are, their demographics maybe, their backgrounds. You may not even need data that is specifically having to even fit into research publications at that point. Because again, if your goal is really just to organize your community, you may not need to share this with outside of your community yet. You may just want to be able to share locations so that when your researchers are thinking about planning a trial, they know how they, if they can access the community at large, if there's certain areas, cities or states or locations that they're available for that trial. Now, again, that's a starting point for some of you that maybe are thinking about how to get started on this. If you're already at that stage where you have your community well organized, and now you're thinking about, actual trials that you're promoting. So again, if you're maybe part of what you're working on right now is a natural history study. The point of a natural history study is essentially trying to get observational data to understand what's the natural course of the disease. In that case, you're really going to need to think about what's the best fit within your community. Is there data that people have already collected? Is there retrospective data that exists? Or is this something that you have the funding to support a prospective trial? In other words, you want to start collecting that data from this point on. So a lot of that has to do with really your organization and your community's resources, as well as what is your priority at this point. So I'm just going to really kind of direct you back to thinking about your research agenda. And I think my colleagues on the panel probably can go more into detail about that. But that research agenda ultimately is going to drive the use of your data. And if your research agenda downstream is to construct, again, regulatory grade data because you want to support clinical trials that are used in creating interventions or therapies, then I think part of it is when you're early in the process, understanding that goal in your research agenda. If that's really where you're going to be aiming, then it may be that that's where you need to direct some of your funding, some of your resources, and understanding the capacity that you're going to need to generate that quality of data. Again, if you don't need that quality of data, that may be a lot of resources that you don't have the room to really spare in your organization to focus on that at this point. But if you are thinking that you're ready, and this is kind of where you're starting to go into with your organization, let your research agenda drive what you want your data to be used for. So the quality should match that purpose.
I think that's a lot of times we talk with patient advocacy organizations, and they've essentially been provided a roadmap of the things they need to do. And the first is you must develop a registry. And I'm not arguing that registries are not helpful, but to Eric's point, they are a tool, right? And so instead of just grabbing a tool, first we should be thinking about what's the thing we're trying to fix, or what is the problem, or what is really the question really at the heart of it. I guess the only thing I would really add to that is we know there's a lot of different organizations out there. There's some small groups just getting started where they are the only organization working within a certain disease state. But there's also others, and I can see a couple here that are still with us on this talk today, where a couple different organizations are focused on the same disease. And I can't tell you how many times we see every organization feeling like they need to develop their own registry or their own natural history study. And I think by combining resources and making sure that we're collecting the appropriate data that is important to a couple different groups, we can work together and collaborate a little bit more, both with industry as well as with some academic researchers, and then hopefully aligning a couple different patient groups together as well. So that would be one other piece of advice, if at all possible, if you can combine your resources and not try to build something independent yourself, but partner with another group perhaps if it's relevant.
I agree with what Eric and Scott have said. Looking at what is out there, what's known. If you're in a place where the course of disease, the spectrum of disease is not well understood, that's an area you need to fill the gap. So when we're thinking about, from a company perspective, you're coming in, you need to answer a whole range of different questions about this disease, about how to study it, about how to assess the outcomes. And you take stock of what is available out in the literature, out in the world, what is known, what is not known, and you start filling those gaps. I think a patient group or any other academic group can fill those gaps just as well. So it really does come back to what's the purpose, what's the goal, and then what information can help fill that goal. It doesn't always mean a registry is the answer to it. Then when you do want to have a registry that's going to be used in to help develop a treatment, used by companies, used by regulators, there are very clear standards about what needs to be done.
There can be multiple research questions, and from the perspective of a patient community, we're spending a lot of time, for important reasons, focused on clinical trials and therapeutic development. But for patient communities, registries also can serve other very important purposes, right? They help us understand our diseases better. They help us understand. First of all, they help you not be so alone as a member of the patient community, and you can start to track your child or your symptoms against what else is happening to other people and start to see, oh, that's not an anomaly. That happens to other people 10 years into the disease or 3 years into the disease, or when we're all 18 months old. And you start to realize that these are commonalities. And while we refer to that as natural disease or disease progression, as a parent, that means something different, right? But the other thing is that then can lead to the development of care standards. And so as patient groups, a lot of times what we can then transform the registries into, working with our scientific advisory boards, medical advisory boards, and other partners, is we can develop and drive care standards in our diseases, which can forever change the landscape in our disease spaces. Another thing that a lot of times patient groups are able to do with registries are develop diagnostic algorithms. As it was said at the very beginning, Harsha, I think you said it, we talked about one of the hallmarks of rare disease are oftentimes very long, expensive, unnecessary diagnostic odysseys. And one of the ways to mitigate that are through, unlocking the learnings in registries and natural history studies and looking at what those journeys look like and how we can mitigate them, looking at whether or not there are genetic modifiers. Can this help us lead to newborn screening or other diagnostics? So I think while we are very importantly focused on how informing clinical trial design and regulatory decision-making, there are other really important things that come from registries. And start by the symptom. I think one of the earliest symptoms we all learned about COVID was the loss of taste. Well, that came from the Stand Up to Cancer registry and people listing that they were losing their taste in COVID, like associating that. That came from a patient registry. That's where we first learned that. So really important things come from registries that can sometimes be seen as anecdotes or sidebars, but lead to really important diagnostics. So I would just sort of stir that into the conversation as we think about, from the perspective of a patient community, whether something's worth the investment and how you build that into your decision-making when you're talking to your board and because we all know these are hard, trade-offs that we talk about as far as investments are concerned.